Hello and welcome back to Whiskey Wars. Tonight, instead of doing a review, we're going to be doing a beginner's guide for bourbon. So let's get into it. So if you are new to bourbon, you're probably walking into the store and you have no idea really what to look for. You're hearing all these reviews, you're seeing, maybe you're part of a Facebook group and you're trying to get advice there, and people are suggesting all kinds of things, and maybe a few bottles keep coming up and you're not really sure what to do, what to buy. And so you go into the store and there's all these different bottles and they have all these labels and there's all these words on them, and you don't know what half of these words mean. So tonight we're going to go through what all these words mean, what actually helps you out on the bottle, and what just means nothing. So let's get into our first word, the most common word. It's on every bottle of alcohol ever, and that is proof. So what does proof mean? Well, proof is just double the ABV, or the alcohol percentage. For instance, bourbon has to be at least 40% alcohol to be bourbon. So that would be 80 proof. Now, bourbons can go all the way up to into the high 100s, especially your cask strength and barrel strength, and we will get into those definitions in just a minute. Next, we'll get into a legal term, and that is straight bourbon. You may see this all the time on various different bourbons. Well, all this means is that it has to be at least aged in new oak barrels for at least 2 years. It cannot be called straight bourbon unless it meets that criteria. Now let's deal with the non-age stated bourbons. Now, if you go into the store and you don't see an age on the bottle at all, that means it has to be a minimum of 4 years old. If it's younger than 4 years, they have to put the age of the bourbon on the bottle. It's a legal requirement. So if you don't see an age statement, a lot of people think that this means that it's a bad thing, but actually it's a good thing, because that means it's at least 4 years old. So that's to your benefit. You're getting a little more flavor than some of the younger stuff. Another common phrase you may see on bottles is non-chill filtered. Well, what does this mean? Well, instead of chill filtering, which is where they get the whiskey very cold and it goes through a thorough filtering process, this non-chill filtering is the opposite of that. It's not cold, and basically all they're doing is just getting the big chunks of char and other things out of it, just so you're not swallowing chunks of charcoal. And this is really good for you. It means more flavor and usually more complexity. The bourbons that are filtered more just aren't quite as good, in my opinion, as the non-chill filtered bourbons. Next, we have another common phrase on whiskey bottles, and that is bottle and bond. Now, the Bottle and Bond Act was passed some time ago, and it was promoted by a group of whiskey distillers that wanted to guarantee that whiskey would be of a certain quality. Well, so what does bottle and bond mean? Well, it means that the bourbon inside is at least 4 years old. It means it's coming from one distiller, from one distilling season, and it has to be 100 proof. And these, again, are all good things for the consumer. So if you see bottle and bond, you know you're getting a pretty good quality product. Next, we have single barrel. And probably the most famous single barrel is the original, and that is Blanton's. Now, like Blanton's, all single barrels follow this same criteria. It's just they're taking the bourbon from the barrel, and it can only come from that single barrel. They're not mixing anything. However, single barrels can be diluted. For instance, Blanton's is 93 proof. So quite a bit of water has been added to Blanton's to get it down to that proof. But one thing of interest is that single barrels can vary. So one single barrel may be excellent and another one may just be okay. Now, some distillers put the actual barrel number or letter or a combination of the two on the bottle, so that way you know which barrel you got. And this can be fun to kind of compare different barrels and see which ones you like better. And also it's good for reviews, because then the person that's watching the review knows, okay, that's a good barrel to go after, whereas another one may not be quite as good. Last, as far as words that actually mean something, is cask strength or barrel proof. Now, these are typically the ones that are really highly sought after, and some of my favorites for sure, and really highly regarded in the whiskey community. So all this means is that they took the barrel, they poured it straight in the bottle and did nothing to it other than maybe minimal filtering. So you're getting everything that was in the barrel right into your bottle. It's not diluted at all, nothing is added to it. It's exactly the way it was in the barrel. And to me, this is the real deal. This is the real product. This is the way whiskey should be. Now, other people may think that it's a little too hot as far as the way it drinks, but I really like the full body, full flavorness of most cask strength or barrel proofs. So if you're getting into higher proofs, definitely something to look for is the cask strength or barrel proof bourbons. Now, let's get into all the nonsense. Probably the most common is going to be small batch. Unfortunately, in almost all cases, small batch means almost nothing. Small batch can vary from distiller to distiller, but sometimes it can be something like 40,000 barrels can be a small batch. I don't know how we're defining small, but that's not small to me and probably isn't small to you either. So small batch doesn't mean anything. And tons of bottles have it on them, just like you're seeing in the video over here. Next, we have reserve or special reserve or limited, limited edition, rare, rare release. These usually don't mean anything. Unless, again, if the distiller has put some kind of number to that you can actually see on the bottle that shows how rare or limited it is. If that's not on there, then it probably doesn't mean anything. It's just a marketing tool to get you to think, oh, I have to buy this today because it's rare or limited or special. Usually none of those are the case. In fact, they're so unspecial that they're sold all over the country. Next, we have some buzzwords that give you that feeling that this bottle was really taken care of by a person, like one person. Words like handcrafted, hand-selected, hand-picked. Maybe it says bottled when ready. Guess what? None of these things really mean anything. First off, every barrel is hand-selected. They take it out of the rickhouse and then they put it on the line and they pour it into a bottle. That's how every distiller basically does it. No one that I'm aware of is going out and like taking some kind of siphoning device and siphoning out one barrel at a time and getting into one bottle at a time by hand. So don't be influenced by these words that make you think that it's somehow crafted better than the other stuff on the shelf, because it's probably not. It's just marketing. Next, another marketing tool that we see fairly often, I would say the most egregious use of this is Jim Beam's Extra Aged. What does that even mean? Because there's no age statement, so it doesn't tell you anything about how much longer it's aged. It could have been aged a month longer than regular Jim Beam. It could be a year, 2 years. On Jim Beam's website, it says it's aged years longer. Well, okay, 2 years would be years. So that means that instead of it being 4 years old like standard Jim Beam, it would be 6. Now that's decent, but it's not like some incredibly old bourbon. A 6-year-old bourbon is pretty standard these days. That's not something that anyone would call old or aged for a long time. So again, it's just marketing. Just more marketing to try and trick you into thinking that this is special, when it's not. It's not special at all. And lastly is bottles that say sour mash on them, or something like that with the word sour mash in there. Again, almost every single bourbon uses a sour mash. And the only difference between a sour mash and a sweet mash, just so you know, is that a sour mash uses some of the yeast from the previous mash. That's it. Now, some distillers really brag about how long they've had the same yeast going, and that's great. But it just being sour mash doesn't make it special at all. And also, just so you know, sweet mash just means they do not use previously used yeast. It's a new yeast strain every single time they distill their whiskey. Now, it's said that sour mash gives you a more consistent flavor profile in your whiskey, whereas sweet mash makes it a little more difficult to accomplish that. So folks, that's most of the wording you're going to see on bottles. There may be more stuff, but anything outside of the first wording that we went through is really just marketing. So don't be buying it just because it says all these fancy words, because most of the time they mean nothing. So instead of going after all these words, go after things that maybe friends are recommending to you, or maybe guys that know whiskey really well. Maybe they have recommended something to you out of their collection, or maybe you've even gotten to try something. And then you'll be much happier with your bourbon experience, and you won't be overpaying for just words. And until next time, folks, just remember, you can never have too much good whiskey.